you should know common hepatic duct because that's on that model. No hepatic portal vein. It's usually purple in color on these models. Hepatic portal vein is usually visible in the back of the liver models, and it's purple. Central vein, sinusoids, bile canaliculi, hepatic triad, and hepatocytes would all be histology of the liver. I do expect to include that on your exam. So you should be sure to look at the liver when you have the microscope out. Gallbladder is in most of these models of the digestive system. So it's almost always colored green. And remember, it is continuous with a cystic duct that unites with the common hepatic duct to form the common bile duct. You can see that series of terms in this model also. To a lesser extent, it's on the torso models. Probably not ask it on that. There's too much other stuff I can ask on the torsos. Urinary system, kidneys. There are two major sources there. This is one. It's a good model, fairly good. And this is what it shows you, the gross anatomy of a kidney. It does attempt at the circulatory system of the kidney, so you should be able to distinguish between the renal artery, segmental artery, interlobars, arcuates, and interlobular arteries. I won't ask you veins because they didn't really emphasize that except for the renal vein. But be able to identify the circulation of the kidney. Also know the segments being the renal cortex, the renal medulla, and the renal pelvis. Recognize the renal pyramids and the calyces. You won't have to distinguish minor from major on that. So that's this part of the model. This model is more gross, so it's not magnified, not sectioned. It just asks you to identify the abdominal aorta and the inferior vena cava, the renal vein, the renal artery, and the kidneys themselves. And you guys should know that in your sleep. This is the challenge. This is a model of the nephron. It's the only one in the class, with the exception of the microscopic histology slide. So you may have a question from this, and they attempted to color code it to make it more visible because it's kind of messed up. Bear in mind that it includes the capillary system of the peritubular capillaries and the glomerulus. It has an afferent arteriole and an efferent arteriole. It has, in the color of flesh, the proximal convoluted tubule. All of this is cortex. All of this is renal medulla. So be able to distinguish what is where. Renal cortex versus renal medulla. So where is the renal corpuscle? It's in the cortex. Where are the convoluted tubules? They're in the cortex. What is in the renal pelvis and renal medulla? That would be the loop of Henle and the peritubular capillaries. In terms of the color, then, it drops down to form the loop of Henle as being this kind of hairpin curved structure in green, and then continues up in the cortex in pink as the distal convoluted tubule, and then this yellow-orange is the collecting duct. So that concludes this structure. You can see the kidneys and ureters and urinary bladder in the torso model if the digestive organs are removed. You will have, as a station, one or two of these models, probably two, asking you the different gross anatomy parts of the kidney. So notice there's not much circulation here. It's all about kidney structure. So the questions that would come from this would be renal cortex, renal medulla with the renal pyramids, and the renal pelvis. Renal artery, renal vein. That's about all I would ask in this model.
Is there another name for renal pyramids? Because I'm not seeing that.
No.
Right under
It's
renal
right here.
medulla.
Okay, got it. I just,
What is a renal column, you might ask? That's
Between pyramids.
the area of the medulla in between adjacent pyramids. It's a narrow area. It's just kind of a filler tissue in between pyramids. Hilum, that's the convex part of the kidney that faces medial.
Sir, can you show us again? The paper got in the way. I'm sorry.
There you are. This is the hilum.
Perfect.
See that? In some textbooks, it may be called hilus. Hilus. Most common term is hilum.
Hilum.
Remember the renal sinus. That's in all the textbooks. It's no big deal. I won't ask it. It's just sort of my thing. It's not even on the model. It's little pockets of fat outside of the kidney. That's all it is. So it's not a part of the kidney. And other textbooks are wrong in saying that. They just repeat the same mistakes, telling me that they're copying information from other books that are also wrong. They don't do their original research. That's typical of a textbook author. That's sort of my aside. Moving right along. Let's get back into relevancy for the test and stop bullshitting. Okay, so I asked you the different parts of the nephron. You can see the renal corpuscle, the nephron itself, glomerulus, all of those terms. I can ask, really I'm limited to this or the histology of the kidney. I will have a kidney slide, I promise. I know that. And on that slide, I expect to show you the renal cortex with the renal corpuscle containing the glomerulus and the glomerular capsule. And then cross-sectional aspects of the renal tubule. I won't expect you to identify the segment of the tubule. You just identify either renal tubule or renal corpuscle. If I say, name this ball of capillaries, the only answer is what? Glomerulus, right. If I say, name this one of two parts of a nephron, and it's pointing to the spherical structure, that would be renal corpuscle. That answer is not glomerulus, is it? There's a difference. I won't ask juxtaglomerular apparatus. I will not ask podocytes. I will not ask calyces. And then the rest are the arteries, which may be asked. I will not ask any of the veins, except possibly renal vein. The ureter is a very narrow tube from the renal pelvis to the bladder. You'll be able to see it on against the back in the torsal models if all the digestive organs are removed. In addition, you can see it in this model, and you can also see it in this model. Why this ureter tube? But if I don't find a model that has it attached to the bladder, I won't ask it, because that's not right. Right? It's got to go from the kidney to the bladder. And you'll have to see that attachment. And of course, you guys know what to do if you're ever confused. Here is your hand. Don't ask me the answer. Don't say, is this right? Although you can sort of just point to it, and I'll give you a sign, because you need to know if what I'm asking is consistent with what you're seeing. So that's okay. But I won't verbally tell you the answer. I'll get as close to that as I can. Moving to urinary bladder, you can see it in this model right here. And I probably have it in the open state, so you can see the rugae and the trigony, as well as the urethra.
What about the detrusor muscle?
Did you see that front?
Mm-mm.
Now this is a male, and this would be posterior view. So just so that you know, these are seminal vesicles, and this is prostate gland. The white tubes are supposed to be the terminal ends or the distal ends of the vas deferens. So when you open up the bladder, you can see rugae, trigony, and the prostatic urethra passing through the prostate. And then just so that you know, if you turn this over to the anterior view, you can see the interior kidney. But we have better models of that, I won't ask that. So that includes trigony, rugae, ureteral openings. Detrusor muscle would be the smooth muscle muscularis in the wall of the bladder. So you should know that term. Ureteral openings I don't think are clear enough. You can see the trigony but not the openings, so you can line that off out if you want. Urethra, the terminal tube, you should know the opening by name. You can call it by either term, urinary meatus or external urethral orifice. I don't believe any of the models show the sphincters, so you can line those off. Remember, the internal sphincter is smooth muscle located right at the origin of the urethra where it leaves the bladder, whereas the external sphincter lies a centimeter or two distal to that, surrounding the urethra. That takes us to our third and final page, and so we enter the reproductive system. I want you to know the gonads, being testes in female, in male, their ovaries in female. In terms of testes, know them. We have a really good male model. We have two of them. And notice that it separates. So you can see the medial sections of the male pelvis. And it's fairly detailed. So basically everything has been painted on these models. They are superb. You can see the testis in white, the epididymis, and the different layers of the scrotum, and this structure represents the spermatic cord, just like in a textbook drawing. The muscle here, get out of my face.
That's sorry. That made me laugh.
I apologize. The muscle here represents the cremaster. The cremaster forming the spermatic cord. The dartos muscle is the reddish layer in the wall of the scrotum. The dartos is this reddish layer. And so the question would be, identify this layer of smooth muscle. And your answer would be dartos muscle. I can do it one way. I can go down the list, or I can just identify everything on the model. How do you want me to do this?
We just wanna know what's
You just need to know what's on it. I hear you. Okay, testes. Eliminate lobules, tunica albuginea, reedy testis, efferent ductule, spermatogenesis. The only thing on the list would be seminiferous tubule and interstitial or Leydig cells. Those are synonyms. Cells of Leydig or interstitial cells, which are the source of testosterone. So in a microscope, looking at a male testis, that's redundant, there's no female testis. So looking at a testis, I would ask you, identify this tube, which is the source of spermatogenesis, and you write down seminiferous tubule. Or if a pointer is on the cells in between the tubules, identified this cell, which is the source of testosterone. I would use that information as a clue, not ask you it. And you would write down interstitial cell or cell of ligate. So that's histology. That's likely that you'll have a section through the testis. The scrotum does show the dartos muscle, as I showed you, and the premaster muscle, so keep those on the list. Epididymis is on the list, it's present in these models. As this structure, it's kind of flesh colored. The ductus epididymitis will not be on the test. You can line that out. That's the single duct, of course, that is in the epididymis. The vas deferens or ductus deferens, it will be difficult for you. So you should look at it carefully in this model and be able to trace it as it passes from the spermatic cord and then enters through the inguinal canal and then courses around the bladder to the back and then passes into the urogenital diaphragm to then continue as the ejaculatory duct, passing through the purple prostate gland, and then eventually uniting with the prostatic urethra. So all of that is here. So look at that in its entirety. Inguinal canal is not well represented, so don't worry about that. Ejaculatory duct is shown here, and that's the short duct in the center of the prostate gland as it transects the urethra. In other words, it's like a road coming right to a freeway. You should definitely expect the prostate gland to be on the test. In most of the models, including the torso model, prostate gland is shown purple. And you see it whole right here in this structure, this model. You have to look for it. It's not real big. And then in the cross section, you see it again right there. Prostate gland. Remember, it's a walnut-sized gland at the base of the urinary bladder, and the urethra passes through it. Seminal vesicles are visible on this model right here. See where my index finger is? That's a seminal vesicle. So it's this multi-compartmental gland attached to the back wall, the outer back wall of the urinary bladder. Seminal vesicle. Bulbourethral glands are represented here, and they're the tiny little gland you see in the sectioned male pelvis that opens into the urethra. Tiny little gland, so name these small male glands. And then we go to the penis. Know the shaft or body. Under the microscope, you'd see the corpora cavernosum and corpus spongiosum, but you can actually see them on this section penis in this model. I always think when students are walking past these open doors, must sound kind of strange. But remember that the urethra passes through the corpus spongiosum. And you can see the urethra passing through the purple corpus spongiosum, and then it expands at the distal end to form the glans penis. And that means the purple spongy body that you're looking in this section is the corpus spongiosum. That means the other one up here would be one of the two corpora cavernosa, in which they do not have the urethra passing through it. This is a circumcised male, so there's no foreskin or prepuce. Recognize the distal end being the glans or glans penis. In the three segments of the urethra, being the prostatic urethra, membranous urethra, and penile or spongy urethra. That takes us to female reproduction.
Did you cross off prepuce?
Yes.
I did because it's been circumcised. There is the little folded skin there which is a remainder, but that's been circumcised. Interestingly, prepuce was shown in the 60s to be a vital source of one of the immunological proteins produced by white blood cells. Anybody know what that product is? I forgot it, so I'm thinking it.
Schmegma.
No. What is sphegma? That's a good question. What is sphegma? Sphegma is a waxy lipid secretion by the penis, and it's secreted into the cavity between the foreskin or prepuce and the glands. And it tends to basically provide lubrication and prevent bacterial infection, presumably. However, if it's not cleaned regularly, it can be a site of infection because bacteria are attracted to it, just like they are to sebaceous glands and for pimples. And so it can be a source of penile infection. And so young boys who are not circumcised need to be taught to clean that. If they're not, they're subject to more frequent infections. That's a freebie. Okay, female reproduction. Oh. Thank you, Terry.
Tell her.
We have two models for female reproduction. It took them 4 years to provide these. For years, we had nothing. So I'm very happy to have these. This is the female reproductive system, which we'll study on Thursday, but the structures that you can see on our list would be the vagina, the vaginal canal. This would be the vaginal orifice opening to the outside. These yellow things would be vaginal glands or vestibular glands. This structure, this organ, is the uterus. The opening into it, from the vagina into the uterus, is called the external os. The canal through its restricted neck-like structure called the cervix is called cervical canal. And the expanded cavity is called the uterine canal. The uterus has 3 layers. The outermost is called, I forgot.
Perimetrium.
Thank you. Should have known that. Perimetrium. And then myometrium is very thick, smooth muscle. And then the inner layer is endometrium. The endometrium has 2 layers of its own. The vesiculosa functionalis is the one that's sloughed off during menstruation, roughly every 28 days. And then we have dual tubes called fallopian tubes or uterine tubes, and they communicate between the ovaries and the uterus. You can see them on the back side of this model. This is a sectioned ovary. This is unsectioned. The end of the uterine tube expands to form the infundibulum, and then the finger-like distal processes are called fimbriae. So these are all visible on this model. The ampulla you can cross off the list. The isthmus you can cross off the list. I only care that you know infundibulum and fimbriae. I skipped ovaries, so let's go back to that, please. That's mostly histological. Probably likely, I'll decide on Thursday if you'll have an ovary slide. They're not very good, so it doesn't show much, which is my hesitation, but we'll see. Ovulation is the process of releasing a secondary oocyte every 28 days. So because it's a process, I'm really not going to ask it. It is shown on this model because you actually see an oocyte leaving the ovary right here in this section model. But that's okay. That'll just confuse you, probably. But notice in the sectioned ovary, there's things going on. It's not just a solid organ with nothing happening. What's going on is you have a follicle that's going through its production phase, which occurs every 28 days. And it changes in size and structure as time progresses very, very quickly. And so usually in a sectioned ovary, you see 5 or 6 so-called ovarian follicles that are in different stages of development. And so this section is anatomically accurate. It's confusing, but we'll go over that in lecture Thursday so you understand it, that what you're seeing is reality, that any ovary has follicles in different stages of development. And so, therefore, I have the terms primordial follicle, primary follicle, secondary follicle, mature follicle. In the histology of the ovary, I would ask you mature or Graafian follicle, and then secondary follicle. And I'll explain that in the lecture. Corpus luteum, definitely on the exam. That's called yellow body, source of progesterone. Corpus albicans is smaller. You probably won't be able to see it in an ovary. It's also called white body. Probably not on the test. You can put a line through that. The words ovarian cortex, ovarian medulla are not important for the ovary. It's if we have an advanced course in anatomy, yes, but not for our class. So line those out. Primordial follicles are very, very microscopic, very difficult to see. Line that out also. You won't see it under the microscope. And primary. So only secondary, mature, corpus luteum, corpus albicans possibly under this subheading of ovary.
Wait, should we cross that out?
Go ahead and cross it out. I won't ask you. I only have the opportunity to ask you 50 questions and there are hundreds of terms, so I have to pick the most important. The next 3 topics, broad ligament, ovarian ligament, suspensory ligament, and actually round ligament. So 4 terms. These are basically strands of connective tissue that support and stabilize the uterus. Otherwise, it would move around a lot around the floor of the pelvic cavity. It's not really attached to anything but these ligaments. So they're like anchors that keep the uterus from moving much. And if these ligaments should weaken, then your uterus tends to tip downward, and that makes childbearing very difficult and painful, and sometimes has to be surgically corrected for you to bear children. So where are they? The broad ligament is this wide structure they're showing here. It's actually a thin layer of collagen that connects the uterus itself to the back wall of the pelvis. And then if we look at this side, we're looking at the uterus and the ovaries. These are the fallopian tubes. The fallopian tube is the major tube, and then it looks like there's another tube just below it. That's not a tube. It's called the ovarian ligament. It's a collection of collagen fibers that form, it's like a minor ligament, although a ligament is defined as connecting 2 bones, so it's not a true ligament. But it is collagen that binds the ovary to the uterus. Those are the only 2 ligaments I care for you to remember, the broad ligament and the ovarian ligament.
You don't want the suspensory or the round?
Correct.
Okay.
Uterine tube, also known as fallopian tube, is nicely shown in this model, which you can see in its entirety, and the distal expansion is called the infundibulum, with a finger-like process called fimbriae. Ampulla and isthmus you can line out. Uterus, also well shown in this diagram. We do have another female model that I'll show you in a moment, but let me finish with this one. The fundus is this upward round part of the uterus, just like the fundus is the upward round part of the stomach. The body of the uterus is most of this structure, and then as it constricts, it forms a neck-like region. The word for neck in Greek is cervix. And so this is the cervix of the uterus. Spoiler alert, as this culture commonly says, the cervix is not a separate organ. right? It's the posterior end of the uterus where it becomes a neck-like structure. Cervix is part of the uterus. And in fact, internally, you can't really tell the difference very well, except that where the uterus constricts, that's the cervix. So this is the cervix of the uterus. This is the body of the uterus. This is the fundus of the uterus. The canal is called uterine cavity. As it passes through the cervix, we call it cervical canal. And that, in addition to the vagina, constitute the birth canal, as we'll see in lecture. In terms of uterus, no fundus, body cervix, no uterine cavity, cervical canal, no internal os, external os. The word os is Greek for opening. And so external os is between the vagina and the cervical canal. Internal os is between the cervical canal and the uterine cavity. Hence, internal and external os. And it is the external os that will actually dilate and open during childbirth, going from less than a centimeter wide to 10 centimeters wide. And that takes usually a little time. That's stimulated by the weight of the child's head pressing upon it, causing it to dilate. It's an autonomic nervous response. The layers of the uterus you need to know. Perimetrium, myometrium composes smooth muscle, and the innermost layer is endometrium. And that may also be visible on a histological slide of the uterus, of which we have, so I'll want you to look at that. I'm not sure if that'll be on your test. Vagina, the word vagina actually means sheath, as in container you stick your knife or your sword. Sheath. So, the vagina, vaginal canal, of course, vaginal orifice, the opening to the outside world, the vulva, or pudendum, I prefer vulva, it's more common, is external female genitals, collectively. Single word for the external female genitals. What does that mean? It's the parts of the female body that you can see without going internal. And so they include the mons pubis, the labia majora, and labia minora. Also the clitoris, which includes the prepuce and the shaft. So, are they visible? Yet. See, I'm already practicing my Russian. No, they're not. I won't ask you. I don't have a good model of that. I'm open to volunteers, but that's a joke. So I'm just kidding. I swear, I'm gonna be fired one of these days. I see if I can.
What's our grade?
Oh yeah. Wait,
Go ahead.
hold on.
But not in.
Hold this.
No, they would allow me to put in the minutes. And then they say, don't come back. So we'll talk about these structures in some detail in the lecture on Thursday. You might be noticing that the clitoris includes a prepuce and a shaft. And you might be going, wait a second, is that a mistype? Because those are parts of the penis. And as we'll learn on Thursday, yes, that's true, but they're also present in the clitoris. In fact, the clitoris is the female homologue to the penis. The only structural difference is that the urethra does not pass through the clitoris. It does through the penis. Interestingly, in rodents, it passes through both.
Okay.
That the clitoris in a mouse and a rat carry the urethra just like the penis does. More information that you need to know. What is vestibule and hymen? The vestibule is basically not on the model, so you can line that out. It's basically a chamber that opens into the vaginal orifice. Hymen is also not on these models. It's a temporary membrane that basically covers either partially or completely across the vaginal orifice. We'll talk about that more. There are no models of mammary glands, so you can eliminate all of those terms. That takes us to human development. And we have a model on that, but I'm not gonna use it. So you can eliminate all those terms. I do have one more model here to ask you to remember. And this model does show the testis and epididymis and the ovaries and some of the follicles inside the ovaries. And then at a more gross level, ovaries versus testes. Not a great model, but it's there. I think that there's enough models, I don't have to use that one. I'm not expecting to.